Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you are here and joining us. I'm absolutely over the moon to introduce to you today our very special guest, Raven Sinclaire. Raven Sinclaire is a writer, teacher, and student of Hermetic Wisdom. And Raven is also the co-author of the best-selling anthology, Ready, Set, Live. She is also the author of the upcoming Old Truths, New Light, guidebook for birthing the quintessential human. Raven is also very well known for being a leader of workshops, retreats, and sacred tours. Raven, I'm absolutely delighted that you accepted my invitation for this special conversation. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Carmen. It's great to be here.
So I know that you have written and spoken about this, and I would love, and I know our audience would love, to hear more about how you've said you've had a lifelong relationship with the unseen. What do you mean by that, please?
Well, we all do. We all have that relationship, and the unseen worlds affect us in critical ways. In my case, from a very early age, my memories start when I was about 2 years old. I saw things and heard things that other people didn't. So ghosts and spirits and angels and fairies, and sometimes they told me things. I guess I was 2 years old when we moved into a house in a little town in eastern New Mexico. And we were only there for about 12 months. My dad was transferred there and then transferred somewhere else, a year later. So we moved in when I was 2 and out when I was 3. But during that time, when I was supposed to be taking my afternoon nap, my mom would go outside to water the flower beds. And I would push the chair in the kitchen up to the wall phone. I think it was that harvest gold color that some of us remember of a certain age. And I would dial the same number every day and tell things to the man who answered. So one day my mom was in the grocery store, and this gentleman came up to her and introduced himself and said, "I think your daughter calls me every day at this particular time." And of course, my mom was horrified. "I'm so sorry. I'll make sure she doesn't do that again." And he said, "Oh, no, please don't make her stop. My wife died last year, and she's the only one who calls." And I'm not sure if my mom ever knew. She died when I was in my early 20s. I don't think she ever knew that it was his dead wife who stood beside me and told me the same number to dial every day and told me what to tell to her husband. I learned from a pretty early age that these were things you didn't necessarily talk about. They made people uncomfortable. But this relationship with the unseen has really propelled me on my path. And I think because I really needed to understand, I really needed to make sense of things that we can't necessarily pick up with our senses. And so Hermetic wisdom really became that clarity for me, because the laws of created things apply to everything, all of creation, whether it involves experiences that we can see and sense or things that we can't.
That is a beautiful story. I love the fact that you were tuned in from an early age, honoring this special aspect of your ability to be aware of what we cannot see, and yet is so real. I find that beautiful. Can you tell us, because you are our expert on this, can you tell us about Hermetic wisdom? What is it? How has it been transformative throughout history? And how is it really a framework for better understanding individual and our collective journey? Would you mind to share about that?
Sure. The concept that we know as Hermetic principles, laws, and axioms, Hermetic wisdom in general, can be traced back to an Egyptian sage named Thoth. He was revered and really studied from at least 3000 BCE. The same Thoth, the Greeks identified with their own Hermes. They gave him the title Trismegistus, meaning thrice greatest, and that's where the Hermetica came to be. Those teachings came to be known as the Hermetica. Islamic prophets also studied or were inspired by Hermetic text, and the esoteric Jewish tradition equates Hermes with Enoch. There are about 22,000 manuscripts attributed to Hermes, very prolific, but it was common for authors not to sign their names to works that were divinely inspired. So something that came maybe through an author rather than from the author, they may have attributed that to Hermes. So there could have been, numerous authors that were writing under that name, just to let us know that these things were inspired by divine wisdom. Way back at the Library of Alexandria, a lot of these texts were collected, studied, and really inspired some of the greatest achievements of that time. Hypatia, born around 370 CE, was one of the first women to study not only Hermetic teachings, but also mathematics, astronomy, philosophy. She became a teacher of those. And of course, it did not end well for her, because that was not something women were necessarily supposed to do back then. But she really deeply studied it and was one of the greatest thinkers of her time. Now, when the library was destroyed, the students of Hermes fled with that knowledge, whether they had the manuscripts themselves or just the knowledge within them. And they escaped to the developing Arab culture. And over the next 200 years, the Muslims built an empire of scientific achievements that were unsurpassed. So the Hermetica became part of kind of a secret underground current in Islamic philosophy, and stayed that way for a while until these scholars were later executed for heresy. So once again, the Hermetic text needed to flee to safety. It needed to be taken to safety. And so that safe place was Florence, Italy. And this was in the 15th century. This wisdom inspired a cultural awakening that really signaled an end to the Dark Ages. And then we saw, the Renaissance and the works of Da Vinci and Botticelli and Michelangelo, who were all students of Hermetica. And as in Alexandria and the covert teachings of Islam, the Renaissance viewed science and art and literature and religion as parts of a unified whole. So they couldn't be studied, they couldn't be separated to be studied in parts. You had to have the whole picture. This is very metaphoric of Hermetic wisdom. Now, the Florentine scholars took that wisdom then across Europe. And they became known, these scholars, as the fifth essence, meaning not composed of earth, air, fire, and water, but of the substance of heavenly bodies. And in England, the teachings of Hermes made it to Elizabeth's the first inner circle. And that included Raleigh, Sir Walter Raleigh, Shakespeare, Francis Bacon, and our own astrologer, Dr. John Dee. A while later, Isaac Newton, very much influenced by his study of the Hermetica. And also Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, of course, was a student. Prague, in the 16th century, was the capital of Bohemia, and scientists and philosophers and Hermetic scholars all found refuge at the court of Rudolph II. So these are just some highlights. There are many more. That's a whole conversation. But throughout history, Hermetic teachings really remain relevant. They bring, when they come back around, when they cycle back around for either individuals or societies, because as within, so without, they bring new perspectives and discoveries and really deeper understandings.
I just want to say I really appreciate your making history accessible. And I also want to give a shout out to Hypatia, one of my heroes, and the fact that a lot of the people that you named as having understanding of this Hermetic wisdom are some of my heroes, like Elizabeth I. So Hypatia, Elizabeth I, Raven Sinclaire. I like the lineage there. And I also heard you talk about, in that very good explanation, the fifth essence, which takes me to, what is the quintessential human, and why did you choose, or why is it that phrase that is what is part of the parlance?
Well, that was a great segue. Thank you. This quintessential human is a blending of human and divine. A lot of people talk about that. They call it the divine human. I think Mr. Chopra, Dr. Chopra calls it the metahuman. Um, but in alchemical texts, we find reference to the fifth element called ether. And that refers to transmutation through divine intervention. So the fifth element is the bridge between matter and spirit, which turns lead to gold if you happen to be in a laboratory and do such things, or human to divine. And so ether is also called quintessence. And the goal of the alchemist is to find the divine spark deep within and focus and work with that spark until all else falls away. So the quintessence of anything is understood to be its most pure form, its perfected form. So I couldn't think of any term that would fit more beautifully.
I love that because it also takes us into a beyond binary realm where real transformation happens. I love also that you're bringing up about the gold, the purification in that way. I'm curious because I can tell from the way you describe this that this is for you, it seems, an ever evolving path. So, one where you take the ancient wisdom and then you make it useful for today. I'm curious, how has your own understanding of Hermetic wisdom evolved over the years?
Hmm. Well, in the early days, when I found a course, a very simple elementary, first level course to Hermetic principles, and I was raising babies. I had three children at home, and was on a spiritual path for sure. I read a lot of books. I meditated every day, things like that. But when I found Hermetic wisdom and took this course, in those days, I really saw it as an organizational system. And it's funny to think about now, but the way it reconciled science and spirit, of course, spoke to me. But it was something also that I could kind of hang my hat on a little bit. So teachings from great masters that maybe I would read or come across, they fit within a structure. So I could better implement them and hang on to them. I wouldn't forget or lose things or stop using it with this structure of Hermetic principles. So that's how it kind of started out. It was a rule book also, for living, which was pretty monumental at that time for me. But through those years, I would put it away at times. Wouldn't think about Hermetic wisdom and would put it away for a time. And then when I would get it back out again, I would have some deeper understanding, some new epiphany. There were even times when I embarrassingly thought that I had grasped everything it had to teach me. And that, of course, would end with me being pretty humbled when a new epiphany came. So I think the biggest transformation back in those years was the realization that we all are above everything else creators. We create in every moment with every breath, and it's not a switch we can ever turn off because it's who we are. So the variable comes down to, are we going to create consciously or blindly? And most of us do a good bit of both of those. But at some point on the journey, my focus turned from inner work to the world around me. I started seeing the cycles of Hermetic wisdom that had happened in the world and that were currently happening in the world. And kind of found a partnership with the universe in a new way. And then eventually I began to teach, then created the 7 Steps to Mastery, which I think we'll touch on in a minute. And even that process, continues to evolve. But I guess relatively recently, maybe the last 5 years or so, I came to understand that these are not only, important laws through which we were created and we also create. They're even more than rules to live a beautiful life and thrive in this human experience. I came to understand that they really hold the wisdom, the key to healing diseases of the body and mind. And yet, an even greater realization, I believe the Hermetic principles, when deeply embodied, are the steps to take us into the next evolution of humanity.
That is beautiful. Truly. I'm really excited to have you here with this storehouse of wisdom. And also, I love the fact that it's dynamic. So it's an evolving set of, as you say it, your 7 steps to mastery. Can you really take us into some of the weeds there and help us understand what are these 7 steps to mastery? Maybe even how did you come to them? And concretely, somewhat, how do they look to those who are trying to engage with them?
Well, sure. As I worked with clients and students in my classes, I wanted a way to sum up everything. Some of my processes are 6 to 9 months long, so I wanted something for them to take with them that, aside from all of the other handouts, that really summed up the what they had learned. And so, the 7 Steps to Mastery started as a worksheet. It was a PDF. It looks pretty simple when you look at it, but simple, of course, is relative. So this was for someone who had, taken these courses and understood pretty deeply what was condensed into 2 pages. These steps are a synthesis of the Hermetic principles, the 7 Hermetic principles, and my understanding of them, tools that I use to understand them more deeply, shadow work tools that I've used in other courses and other teachings from my other courses, all kind of rolled into this. And these 7 steps eventually became an entire coach training program.
Wow. Can you name some of them for us or help us? Like, I'm just fascinated. I would love to hear more.
Sure. Well, the 7 Steps to Mastery go along with the 7 Hermetic principles. So there is the principle of mentalism, and that is talks about, creation. Matter is densified spirit, and spirit is refined matter, and creation begins in spirit and then densifies down into matter. Let me reframe that. The highest level creations begin in spirit, and are densified into matter. This basically tells us that we began as thoughts in the mind of God, and we've never left. So the realization, to realize that we are co-creating with God, that's who we are, and that's what we do. So in a very tiny nutshell, that's mentalism. The principle of correspondence is as within, so without. So that is just the concept that everything is mirrored in everything else. And that's a big rabbit hole to go down. But one of I guess something that stands out about the principle of correspondence is that if we deeply understand one thing, then we can take that knowledge and deeply understand something that we may not know anything about. So that's an interesting thing. A tool that I like to use in correspondence, a very surface tool, there are deeper ones too, is if someone is stuck on, if I'm writing a chapter in a book and I'm stuck, or creating a new course and I get stuck, I pull up YouTube do-it-yourself videos, and I might watch the first one that comes up. It might be how to plant a tree or how to change the oil in your car. And, what does changing the oil in my car have to do with me creating a new course on Hermetic wisdom? Quite a lot, quite a lot if you look at it that way. So that's a fun thing. The principle of vibration is next. That's the 3rd principle. We hear a lot about that, through the law of attraction and things like that. It's only one principle though. And in order to truly understand vibration, you need to understand the other 6 as well. Principle of polarity. We're seeing a lot of that in the world today, which is perfect because creation is polarized. When something is created, its opposite is created as well. And that keeps us going and moving and evolving. Otherwise, we would be stagnant. The principle of rhythm, and that everything comes around, everything comes back around. The pendulum swings, and the principle of cause and effect, karma, a little more complex than I'm saying here, but and the last one, the principle of gender.
Wow. And the principle of gender can you speak a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah. So it's probably the most misunderstood. People get very triggered by it. It's so interesting. It has little to do with the battle of the sexes or, male versus female or anything like that. It's the generating principle. So you can look at it that way. We all have those, we all have all of those within us. So to understand what is feminine and what is masculine, and to be able to use those in a balanced way, that's really the ultimate. So the principle of gender is super important to practice all of the other 6 principles. You have to use it. You have to know that balance and feel that balance and understand it.
Wow, I just want to go back to the second one too.
Mhm.
There's so much here to unpack. This is amazing. When you were talking about watching a YouTube video, I mean, I've watched a lot of those too, like when I'm fixing the house or something. And when you said you would watch one on the oil changing, and what does that have to do with creating a course? Oh, lots of things. I believe you. I'm just curious, could you name a couple of things? Just to take it another step further? I'm totally on board, because without knowing that this was the second of your 7 steps of mastery, I'm there with you on this correspondence. That's so wise.
If you're watching a video, say on planting a tree, and they are very careful with the roots. They wrap the roots. They're transferring it from one place to another. They dig a deep hole. They put all kinds of nutrients in this hole. It's not something you haphazardly do. And then you plant that tree and fill it in with all the things all the food for it to grow, and then you have to water it. If you let weeds overtake, it can really affect it. So, interestingly, if you plant an acorn, you're going to get an oak tree. That's absolute. You can't get a maple tree if you plant an acorn. So the only thing that you can do to mess it up is to let all kinds of mess come in, all kinds of distraction come in, and the weeds overtake it. So what we plant, we are going to sow. So the mindfulness about that is important. I don't know if that answered your question.
It did, because I was thinking, my guess would have been with the oil change, something about how things need lubrication. There's a certain place to put it. But the tree analogy, planting a tree, is even clearer, I would think, because I understand what you mean. It needs the taking care of the roots. It needs the right nutrients. It needs to be positioned in the right place. It's so holistic, Raven. I absolutely love it. I'm wondering, if I found myself, can you give us an example? And I first want to give the caveat of, I know that this system has a simple sort of core element of transformation, but I also know that it's quite complex, takes some time and everything. So I don't want you to feel like you have to put it all in a nutshell to keep the acorn analogy going. But I'm curious, if I were in a situation, I can't, you can come up with one. And if I were following this Hermetic wisdom and was really trying to evolve myself through this, can you give an example of how you would navigate some certain situation in your life with some of these principles? Does that question make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I think an exercise comes to mind. I use this every single day, Carmen, every single day. And it's had some profound effects, not only on me, but on students in my classes. I use it with the principle of mentalism, but it works with correspondence. It absolutely illustrates the principle of correspondence, the principle of vibration, all the others as well. And I call it, I had a dream. And the exercise is when you are going through, some situation that is upsetting. It actually doesn't even have to be upsetting. You can take a mundane day, but if you're going through something or having a conflict with someone, or you don't like your job, you write that situation as if it were a dream. So you start out, I had a dream. You write it all down. When we interpret a dream, we normally look at all the aspects as parts of ourselves. And so, I guide people to do that. The lady that was rude in the grocery store, the man who pulled out in front of you, the washing machine that doesn't work anymore. These are all aspects of you. What is that? What is that telling you? And these are not only so fun, but they're kind of jaw dropping at times. So I've seen, you know, I, I've seen people get text from someone they haven't spoken to in years right after they do this exercise because they see it in a new way, and it's like it triggers something, something unleashes. I've seen people that had cars that didn't work that started working. This sounds kind of outlandish, but I've seen some crazy things using this exercise, and it can be just a very simple thing as well.
So a lot of times people, I understand your attitude towards writing, that it's a form of expression. A lot of times people seem to have, because of maybe perhaps the schooling we were, found ourselves in the sort of system. But when you say writing, sometimes people are like, "Ooh, I don't know, it kind of scares me. I have to get the grammar right." But when you're talking about this, write down, "I had a dream." What advice do you give to someone, or what do you yourself do so that you're not hung up on the, did I write it right? Does that make any sense? Where you're not pulled into that sort of perfectionistic view of writing.
Yeah, so nobody else is going to see this unless you want to read it to them. I have people read it out loud because, if they want to. I mean, nobody has to, but they read what they wrote out loud because you can hear things when people read it that, especially an outsider looking in, you can hear things that, almost are funny sometimes because they're so obvious. So that's what I say is don't get hung up on anything. This is your journal. You're just writing. It doesn't have to be spelled right. You don't even have to have punctuation. You can tell us about it in your own words. But yeah, it's just really something for the individual.
I love this also, the way it relates to self-awareness in a very deep way, and also in a very creative, imaginative way. I think that sounds, I know that's just one of many different practices and approaches that you teach, but I find that one particularly powerful, to write it down as if you're writing, "I had a dream." I can imagine I'm going to try that myself. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, when you're talking about the quintessential human, is there one core piece of advice, one secret almost from your vast experience of not only studying it, but writing about it and working through it with your own life, which to me is the key element, is the fact that you're a practitioner and one who, it's not static for you, it's an evolving practice. Can you give us either one piece of advice or a secret to being this quintessential human?
That's a big question. The secret is, it sounds really simple. The secret is in vibration. Um, that's the secret to everything, vibration. And it's something, we hear all the time: shift your vibration to match what you want. We hear this, and it sounds so easy. It's so easy to say. But the principle of vibration is the third Hermetic principle. And I mentioned this earlier, like all the Hermetic principles, it must be understood in relation to the other six. So if you're just working with vibration, or think you're working with vibration, that's only one piece of the puzzle. So just in a nutshell, I don't know how this will sound to people, but the less dense we are, the lower our vibration is. The the more we can become free floating particles. When we are in states of ecstasy or joy, we're much lighter, we're a higher vibration, we're not as dense and heavy. So we inch closer to spirit, we inch closer to being co creators with God. So when we're in that space, that high vibe space, that free floating particle space, things can shift so dramatically, almost instantaneously. So we create in spirit. I mentioned this earlier, and then in the unseen realms, and then we densify or bring that down into matter where we can experience it. Um, When we first begin this journey, Carmen, this quintessential path, we probably won't be masters of it. I know I'm not. Maybe we won't immediately heal our bodies or create the life of our dreams. We won't automatically be that divine human transformed before our eyes. But even the path to those attainments um, will be filled with some pretty extraordinary experiences. So it's about the presence, the magic of that present moment, and not necessarily where we're headed or where we're going. That's the amazing journey.
I'm really down with that point of it's not you're not fixated on the product or on becoming a total master at this. You're really focusing on the numinous now and how we can embody that moment and be open. And I'm thinking from everything that you've described, Raven, so beautifully, that you do hear from your students and you yourself have experienced that there is also an element of having more peace and having a calmer spirit. Is this true?
Absolutely true. Yeah. I often say, just do the sacred work that's in front of you. And that's a takeaway that a lot of people write back to me or tell me about that they can hear my voice saying that, but the sacred work in front of us may be sweeping the floor. It may be cleaning the toilet sometimes. It may be helping a friend or protesting or casting a vote. It shows up as a lot of things, but when we treat all of those things with reverence, that they are really sacred, then that transforms everything for us.
That to me is profound. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Because it means that if you do what lies nearest at hand, you enter into the sacred stream of things, which to me is such good advice, Raven. I really appreciate you highlighting that, especially as something we can all do. I'm curious, as we come to a close of what you have covered so much, so well, so accessibly. I want to thank you again. You're an amazing teacher. Do you have any one last word or anything you want to share with us? And also, I'd like you then, if you could, to let us know where we can find you online and learn more.
Oh, thank you. Well, I have an upcoming book, and so I have a lot of new information that has come from a lot of, just connecting in and a lot of practice. And so I have a retreat called the Quintessential Journey that's coming up, and it's really a condensed wild ride of a retreat because it's 6 2-hour Zoom sessions. And it will cover all of the principles and all of the themes of my 6 to 9 month process with some new epiphanies and things from my upcoming book. So people can find out more about that course or any of my work at ravensinclair.com. I also do sacred tours to Scotland and other tours, music tours and things like that to Scotland. And my company is tracelesstours.com. I have a 13-day tour next year that is seeing Scotland through the lens of Hermetic wisdom. So very excited about that. And then quintessentialhuman.com is the coaching program.
So Raven, when you talk about leading these tours to Scotland, I immediately think of thin places, those places where we can feel holiness and feel an immediacy with the spirit and with mystery. So do you have that sort of experience with Scotland? How do you lead these tours?
I often talk about the Holy Land of Scotland. There are so many sacred spaces there that we visit, and people can have really profound experiences. It's one of my favorite places to explore Hermetic wisdom because it works so beautifully with that. The terrain does. You can take people through, the rhythms and the cycles with the travel through it, and people tend to, just have understanding that surpasses maybe a heavier or denser place that they might visit. So, yeah, Scotland's a special place.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I'm living vicariously just thinking about it right now. So I want to thank you, Raven. You have shared so many amazing things. I want to remind everyone that they can find you very easily at Raven Sinclaire with an E at the end. So RavenSinclaire.com. And thank you so much for taking the time and participating today and sharing with us this wonderfully, uniquely needed Hermetic wisdom, Raven.
Carmen, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. I so appreciate what you do.
What a wonderful session with Raven Sinclaire. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for listening.